Perfect. All right. Well, welcome Thad and Ryan, our special guests. I'll let them kind of do their intro and then take it away with their presentation.
Yeah. Thad, why don't you go first? You're first on the screen.
Sure. I'm Thad Dahlberg. I'm a senior software engineer at the University of St. Thomas, and I've been working in education for 25 years. I was a teacher for 3 of those years, and I worked at a Luther seminary for 6 of those years, and St. Thomas for a bunch of them. And so I've been kind of in this space a long time. And my little saying there, if I build it, they'll tell me what they want, which is how things have always worked at St. Thomas, at least for me, where I do a lot of rapid prototyping after hearing maybe some of their needs. And then I really get feedback at that point. So it's an okay way to work. Sometimes it can be a little bit daunting, but Ryan, take it away.
Yeah. So I'm Ryan Blake. I am a solutions engineer at Cloud for Good, which is a premier consulting partner that works with nonprofit and higher education organizations. And I've also worked in higher ed, really my entire professional career. It all started at St. Thomas, which is actually how Thad and I and Mike all got connected. But I spent 8 years in recruitment admissions. I also then moved into central IT and was the CRM director for Salesforce Marketing Cloud. And that team in general supported a lot of other systems and still does. And then during that time, I also had worked with a nonprofit through an entire season and really got a really good perspective about differences, but also similarities between the two. And then I am often asking questions. There's usually a running joke for people who know me about no meeting is over until Ryan asks a question, because I tend to get them right at the end. So, but yeah, that's me in a nutshell. And I'm guessing we can share, we do some screen sharing capabilities. We can dive in. So let me share my screen. We are talking about Summit events today. And we do want to thank you for having us here today. I know Thad and I, I'm probably speaking for Thad, but we always get excited when we have an opportunity to talk to different groups around North America in particular about another event, a solution that started with some, I would say, really specific needs, but now being able to grow and serve more and more. So as I say that, I think this actually, I can try to click slides here. It kind of feeds into like, what is the app collectively? And I think, well, we're going to talk more about like, what is it and how does it work and stuff. This kind of highlights a lot of kind of why, and it highlights it all kind of in a good summary. But the fact that it's a community built solution, really trying to solve a lot of those event registration and event management needs. And I would say the summary and the reason why people tend to like have some interest is because the word free is associated to it. So that always drives some initial interest. But the goal is to really serve a broad variety of needs for those event registration and management needs, particularly in the education and nonprofit community, being that's where it initially started with education, really having a heart for the nonprofit community, wanting to make sure there's something that is affordable, but also meets the needs for what they're trying to accomplish. It is simple yet sophisticated. And then the goal, and I think this is really important, the goal that we've always had in mind is we want admins to not have to do a lot of stuff. We want the end users, the event managers, the people who are actually doing the events, we want them to be able to really take advantage and have full control about how they can manage their events, manage registrations, brand it, create the custom questions, anything that you can do. We want to make sure that the admin's role is a little bit lighter from that perspective. So
we have a question here about what the Salesforce.org Commons is.
Oh, yeah.
It's something that we are a part of. You'll see some more slides about it later and a picture of the person who kind of runs, Corey O'Brien, who runs the Commons if you have more questions. But it is a group of community created solutions for nonprofit and education. And as Ryan said, this is a free tool. So we're not really trying to sell you anything. So we aren't necessarily going to be doing any hard selling or trying to fluff things up better than they are. But we are kind of calling you to community, which is the Salesforce.org Commons is a community where you can engage, you can help these products succeed. And it's not just summit events like the Nonprofit Success Pack is a part of that community. though it is more owned by Salesforce.org than the community, but they do want engagement through that community. And there are a bunch of other tools that have come out of that community. And so every so often they have a thing called a sprint, which you are all welcome to, look on the Trailblazer community. We have a link later on in this presentation where you can go and join these sprints, pick a project, and they're usually like 2 days. Sometimes they're virtual, sometimes they're in person. And you can work with other people that are kind of in your same situation, nonprofits and education, and make connections and help us all succeed.
Awesome. Good question. I think the next one is the intro slide, which we already did, but I will take this chance to call out. We can be very informal with this. We have a whole slide, but we want to make this a very engaging presentation. So if questions come up, feel free to raise your hand and we'll pause and call on you when there's a good break, or put them in the chat. And one of us will either answer it in the chat or we'll we'll take a pause and answer it in person, which I would say both ways might be good. But we definitely want to make it address. So don't hold on to your questions to the end. Ask them at the moment, and we'll address them or call out that let's talk about at the end. So awesome. So, this presentation is available online. So if you want to download this or you want to follow along or look ahead, you can scan the QR code, or I'm sure we could drop I don't think I can copy it from here. I'm sure we can drop the link into the chat.
I'll do that.
Okay. But as a follow-up, this is something that you guys can access to be able to get to if you want to share it with your peers or colleagues. So, but what we're hoping to cover today, we want to be able to, I guess, have you walk away and be able to answer these 4 questions about what is the Summit Events app, why is it what it is, and what's the catch? I think that kind of sold it out there right already of like, we're not trying to sell anything. So what is the catch? How does it work? And then where is it going? And kind of some insight in terms of what we're going to what we are hoping to do in the future. And I would say one reason why we're hoping to get more community involvement. So kind of starting with the first one of what is the Summit Events app. I kind of alluded to this earlier, but it is a free, affordable event registration tool to where you can create everything natively in Salesforce, create, I would say, what would be what I'm going to call a beautiful experience for somebody to actually be able to virtually not have to log in, get a form, register, have it feed directly into your Salesforce, and all be managed through native Salesforce functionality. So it's that fourth bullet I would really highlight of it's native to Salesforce. And I would say it's the true sense of native to Salesforce is that that's all you need to know. We have stuck very closely to that to that model to make sure that it is configurable and things that you want to do is just pure Salesforce. So,
which should be noted, we really tried hard to make this a low bar. It's like you need the platform, and then you don't need community license or anything like that to run Summit events.
Yeah, Heather's got a question.
Actually, that was my question. If it's done on experience,
which is a great question, and that just answered. It's not, you do not need Experience Cloud or Experience Cloud licenses. It's done on sites, so you can create a site. This is created. We're actually leveraging the guest user as part of that site, and it's one thing that took a long time was to go through security review and make that work and happen. But it was also really fulfilling experience because we were able to, I would say, get Salesforce's blessing to be able to have this be a published application as part of their open source commons and on their install site. As you can see, there's an install now. If you go to install.salesforce.org, you can actually see it's on the second tab. I think it says open source commons still. You'll actually be able to download it into a sandbox or dev.org or trailhead.org to be able to play with it. And then our site has all the instructions on how to set it up. So
it should be noted that this could be listed in the App Exchange, though we haven't done that yet, because that would be a lot of support for our community to have to engage with. So if you guys want to come on board and help with support or use the product, that's all really good. Also, as Robert noted earlier, there is a release coming out that has a lot of bug fixes and stuff, and that should be around the beginning of March. So look for that. I think that'd be a good one to start with if you were thinking about putting this in production, though the other one works as well. Other schools are using it right now.
Yep. What does it do, or like what kind of things are captured in it? So this just kind of gives a high level of being able to create events from various use cases, online registration forms with branded templates, be able to sync and connect to your contacts and leads so that you don't have to deal with duplicates, knowing that that's a problem in most Salesforce orgs is duplicate contacts of some kind. So this will help you keep that discipline. Being able to have transactional emails. So it's triggered based on an action. And then it has the ability to sync with payment processing data. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit in terms of what that means and kind of where that looks in the future path or down the roadmap. So
someone wants to know how to engage. And I think probably the best place is to hit us up in the Trailblazer community. And I'll put a link to that once I find it. We have links later in the slide that we can show too.
Do you want to talk about this one, Thad?
Yes. This is a little bit of why it happened and where it came from. And so when I was started in 2016, I think at St. Thomas, was it that long ago? Yeah.
I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah. I was brought on to be an embedded web developer for the admissions team there. And I inherited several Java applications that talk to a database, that talk to our system of record banner. And these applications were for events. There was one for events, one for visits, scholarships, all these things that had to do with undergrad admissions. And so the first week I was there, I was called into a room and I had to they were like, we're doing a new kind of application. It's going straight into Salesforce. I didn't know what Salesforce was, but that was my first exposure. And I was left with the choice of taking these apps and making so the data would push itself into Salesforce, or to try to pursue making native apps for these solutions we already in place. So we actually did go out and look at a bunch of different event solutions, and we had all the stakeholders in the room, and they all came out with a lot of like, well, you had this custom built so that it would do this for us or that for us. And the vendors were like, yeah, well, we can do that for you, but it'll be this much more or that much more. And then the licensing was on top of that and everything else. And in the meantime, I had worked out this kind of, again, I built something and said, here's something that could probably work. And when they saw the price tag for these other things, they said, we're going to try to go with that. And so I ended up building this thing called the UST events, which is where Summit events started. It's been refactored and rebranded, but it's really based on stuff we knew in our process of like bringing in, we have daily visits, we have big events, we have overnights, these sorts of things where we needed to take in information about an event and get someone registered and then have it appear on that contact record so that we could know, so the counselors could see, oh, one of my students is coming to this event and know immediately that that's happening. And then we were approached by Salesforce.org that in our customer success, what is that called?
Yeah, it was a customer success architect.
Yeah. And they were like, well, you're doing something that a lot of different schools that we know of need. Would you consider sharing this? And there was a little bit of a talk up the chain of my command all the way to the provost. And but St. Thomas is one of our mottos is all for the common good. So it was a really easy sell. We like to give things back to the community. We like to help. And education, I think, in general, is a very sharing kind of community. So we pursued opening it, making it available through Salesforce.org and their open source commons. And now it has become much more enterprise. We at one point I had to tear away a lot of the things that I really liked about what it did for us in order to make it work for more people. And you'll still see some little artifacts that are more educationally in there, but it's definitely not tied to EDA or NPSP. It's very independent of itself. It has its own object architecture, which we'll look at in a little bit. And just with our latest release, I think we've gotten more of a parity between what UST events was and what Summit events is now. And our admissions team is ready to really, they've been using UST events for a while. Our alumni team has been using Summit events. And now we're going to start really hardcore. Everybody's using Summit events. So it's going to be an exciting time.
So this is where we want you to experience it. So I would suggest actually pulling out your mobile device, because I think for me, anything that's on a computer should be just as good on a mobile device. Knowing that people are either answering their emails or whatever the case on their mobile phone, event registration link should work just simply. So let's say take the opportunity to scan the QR code, and you'll see just a very simple event. It is very streamlined. It is just very first name, last name. But it really hits on the core of how Summit Events is structured, and that's what we want to highlight.
And that QR code is directly right out of the event register or the event record in Salesforce, so you can easily copy that in.
Awesome. So as I talked about just the core structure, I think, Thad, you were going to talk about the object.
All right. So we did have a consultant come in at one point, and it was trying to work from the visit office end where they were in Salesforce exclusively. And event architecture can be debated forever, but I've seen this iterated in different forms and different people's versions of events, and I think it's pretty solid. But the thing that doesn't quite make sense to most people is why there's an instance record. So the top level is the event, and that is where you kind of set up the event, the messaging, a lot of the options that'll happen, what kind of questions are going to be asked, fees or anything that might be attached to that event. And the instance is really the date of the event. And that doesn't make sense if you're doing like one event, like once a year. Why do I have two objects? But if you're doing like a daily visit, you can set up that whole daily visit and then have instances of it every work day of the week. It makes a lot more sense than you're not setting up an event every day. You're setting or cloning it and trying to make it work. You're just setting up an instance, and the instance is really just the date and time of the particular event. And so you can have one event set up of multiple instances of that events, and then there's two. Go ahead.
I was going to say it's anything that would be recurring. So whether that's info nights or I think some of them sound like very specific to higher ed, but if it's anything that happens on a regular cadence, and the content's not really changing, right? It's a lot of the similar things. And that's where you come in with multiple instances and save yourself time, but also enhance reporting to be able to see collectively how many people are attending these things or even multiple times without having to bridge too much together.
So we have like two columns there just to signify that you can have multiples of each. So each instance has its own set of registrations on it. Incidentally, we do have new way to sign up guests that are coming along with you. Those become actual registrations that look up to the host registration. So you can see what that particular registrant, all the people that they signed up to host. So it's a really simple architecture. But on the next slide, you'll see that we've expanded it some. And I would say that one of our points of pride is that we've kept the object architecture pretty slim. Like we have 11 objects. If you look at a lot of event solutions, you have multiples of this 4 or 5 times sometimes. So you can see in the middle there the 3 objects we just talked about. And then when you get, there's a payment object for receiving payments, and we'll talk about what that means maybe later. And then fees are attached to the registration. So each time you incur a fee in the event for something, that gets added to the payment record. And so it's all gathered there. But at the top level, you see events. Questions are one of our newer features where you can ask a really infinite amount of questions if you want to, as long as you have a way to map them to the registration record. Emails are like set up on statuses of the events. So when someone registers, we call them transactional emails. We don't encourage you to use this as like a marketing or campaign device. It's more of like, I just registered. Thanks for registering. Here's your email. Because you do have org limits on how many emails you can send in a day. Appointment types is a little bit weird for people sometimes, but it's a page on our site where if you think of it as someone coming for a visit at St. Thomas, we really have specialized visits so that you can really cater your engagement on campus to exactly what you want. You can request to see a particular kind of coach, like I want to see a football coach. I want to attend this sort of class, and all that stuff gets asked on our appointment level. And then we really have a great visit office that goes and then coordinates all of that stuff with hosts. So there's a host record you see there. So that those appointments that get made, the appointment type defines the appointment, but the appointment itself becomes a thing that you can add a host to and a time and things like that. So it really is pretty intricate.
Which, Heather, it looks like you have a question.
Yeah, I was going to say, so there's that information not tied to the instance? Like, it seems like it's separate.
Yeah. So you see that top section there is all kind of setting up the event, questions, emails, event, appointment type. And then instance becomes like the date of the event. And then all registrations hang off that particular date of event. So, and then the registration has a certain amount of information that is tied to it. So there is a distinction there. But Ryan, you want to say something? Sorry.
I was just going to say there almost could be a dotted line between instance and appointment type, because you can restrict certain appointment types to instances. But I would say the general idea is is thinking about what that registration experience is going to be and how you are setting it up. Is at that event level, which is where you'd still do it. But then you can restrict it to certain days of the week, certain times. You can do a lot with the appointment type object. And it also threw out there that, and you'll see this in the next demonstration of what I'll go through, of like appointment types. It sounds very specific to higher ed. It's actually something that can be leveraged kind of beyond, as we've had more conversations with other institutions, other nonprofit organizations about where it could be utilized. We'll see the next demo of like appointment types is almost a name, but it has other functionality that can be leveraged beyond just this individualized appointment that might require back office administration.
So let's speed along because we really want to get to a demo, because this might get too cerebral and academic. Summit Events is really a kind of an old school technology, visual force pages with Apex controllers. It's not a Lightning Web component that you could put inside of your experience site, but it is very stable and we've made it very templatable. It takes that. The templating part we're working on a declarative templating system, but you can actually make really robust templates to add to Summit Events that let you, you'll see some in a minute, but you can really do, like, we want it to look like you're at St. Thomas still. And we don't want it to just be one of those chintzy little, put your logo here and the rest is really generic. So you'll see that, but this is like the progression of visual force pages, and they appear or don't appear based on how you've set up the event. So the first page is a registration page. You'll see in a minute. There's a lot of pre-built questions you can ask there. Then you jump to an additional question page, which is more of a free form. I want full control over my questions, and I want them to map to this part of my registration record. And incidentally, the registration record, we land everything there because we found that our team, at least the end users, don't want to hunt around for a bunch of places to figure out what's going on in the events. So we kind of stuck to a model where all of your registration info lands on a registration record. That being said, appointments does hang off a registration record, so you can adjust those because they're more transactional between a host and the users. But we'll maybe get to see that. Guest registrations is when you can add guests to your particular event. So someone signed up for an event, but they're also bringing this person, this person, this person. That is very a free-formed kind of question response thing, because we found that you really couldn't narrow that down very much, because you don't necessarily want to ask the registrant and the guest the same questions. You might want to pare that down. So you can see how that might look in a little bit here. Appointments, we talked a little bit about. There's a donation page. It could use a little TLC from someone who really cares about a donation page. It does, well, Ryan found a bug, so I need to fix that, but it does ask you, it asks you how much you want, or you can have a pre-drop down list, and then you can have a set of we call them fee allocations, but they're really like budget lines or different kinds of funds you're sending them to. Yeah. Submit reviews everything for you, and then when you hit submit, if you do have a gateway set up, it will jump to that. But this does not live in Summit Events. We because we're part of the open source commons, we can't hard package any one solution into our our products, but we have built a way for you to jump out to another solution and then jump back into Summit events to the confirmation page. And we would love some people to take this on and to share their recipes for like Stripe. I'm currently working on something that isn't really portable because we use TouchNet, and TouchNet has some weird rules about static IPs, and you have to set up proxies and things, and it's not easy to use, which I wish it was because I could share it. I will share it, but it's not easy to do. So this is the progression, and now I'm going to let Ryan start talking and show you some of the actual stuff.
Yeah. So again, we're going to give you a chance to experience it virtually. This one, I will drop the link in the chat once I exit out of this. But we're going to show you the page progression that Thad had just walked through. We're going to go through almost all of those pages just so you can see a much more complex and comprehensive type of event. Being that this is a nonprofit user group, I tried to put a nonprofit spin on it. So hopefully it reaches. There we go. It's already in the chat. I think so.
Should be. I think it's jumping through Google.
Is it okay?
I'll get through. Sorry.
Well, this here, I can put it in there. I got it right here.
Claire got it already.
Oh, quick, quick, Claire. So this is, I think, if you guys did the first registration, the basic one that we had sent out, you could saw that there was a branded template. This one doesn't have a branded template. So this is just out of the box. It's a general template that we have. So anybody who spun it up, who wanted to get an event out there, could do all of that very quickly. But I've tried to set up some type of gala. We're based in the Minneapolis, Twin Cities area. So I thought I'd go with the sculpture garden just because I think it's really cool. But there'll probably be snow in March. So realistically not real. But the idea of what you can see here is that everything that's set up here. This is all pulling directly from Salesforce. So setting up the page, setting up the questions that are being asked, the events, the location, being able to have the links so that when you click out, you can actually get to the Google map of where it's located. All things that I would say when you're experiencing the event registration process from an end user, we want to make it as simple as possible. So even here, there's a standard set of questions, and this is where we see questions a little bit more static. We also know that you want to be able to label things differently. So this one name for name tag is an example. The field is actually called a preferred name, but I relabeled it to make it a little bit more sense for what this event looks like. The minimum amount of fields you have to have on this page is first name, last name, and email. And we've done that intentionally because I don't think I've ever attended an event that didn't ask for my first name, last name, and email. I'm actually thinking, I don't think I've ever had an event that's only asked for those three things. It's typically a lot more, but I'm just going to pre-fill this out quickly. I'm going to put in a phone number, more so just 10 digits. I'm going to select the mobile, and you can see it drops down and asks you about if you're willing to receive text messages. I'm going to check it yes, put in my pronouns, and then say, got it from an email. This is more of just a text box if you want them to type in a lot. And then also being able to have a drop down about, have you ever been to the Sculpture Garden? You can add whatever you want here from a custom pick list that you're choosing. These are both set to ask and don't require. But anything that's on this page has the ability to be able to ask and require, or just don't ask at all. And in the case of don't ask at all, it's just going to not show that question. So this is the first page that we first experienced that you guys already saw, that maybe saw a little bit in that basic event. We jump to the next page. This is where we get to that additional questions. You can see that, again, the image changed because I was able to change the text and the content of what this page says and reflects. It created some custom questions to be able to input these. And I think the other piece is that my browser is recognizing that these are address fields. So even knowing and recognizing the type of field that it's being used becomes important for the exact reason of what I just did in the pre-fill. I know that can create issues sometimes, but the opportunity to do that from registration or from a registrant becomes really meaningful. And this is where we can add, I think Thad said it, like an infinite amount of questions, as long as they have somewhere to be mapped to, which all happens on the back end, and we'll get to that. We then get to the guest registration piece. And again, this page, we can build and brand and style to the way we want to, but we can start to then ask questions to be able to build our registration list. and set limits to how many people somebody could bring. So I have this set to 4. So in this case, in the way that I styled this event and actually having a conversation with a nonprofit organization yesterday, they were like, well, what if somebody wants to register, but they don't know who yet? I would say, let's make sure that we actually get them in there. So I created a simple field that says, hey, do you want to hold a spot for a guest? We're going to go ahead and say, hold your spot. We're going to add them. You can see it fills out nothing, but then I might also know my wife's name, put her in here. And we can pre-order the fields. So maybe I'll actually show that. We can see how it changes. We'll add in here. I don't want to enter email address, so I'm going to. But again, we start to build this registration list and we see how many times we can add it. If we just do this fully, see when we get to that last one, it grays it out and you can't keep adding more. Like you're physically stopped from doing it since that's what we said is the requirements for it. Just going to delete these 2 though. Wait, next. This is where we get to, it was called appointments and appointment types. But this is, I identified it as more of like session options, trying to build what your experience is going to be like at this gala. Typically, there's always programming, potentially a silent auction. So you can see silent auction is listed here and you can't actually remove it from your selected options. It's there and set to added and required. So there's nothing you can do to change it. And it also is not asking for input. But in the case of like, in terms of touring the garden, we want people to do that, come and experience the whole thing. But if you didn't want to, you could easily remove it. Something that we're just promoting, getting in there, any type of session speakers, allowing them to come and determine are these things they want to attend, how many people are coming, dinner is there. If people are going to select to come to dinner before the event starts, they actually have to answer the registrant question. So in this case, I had 3 guests. I'm going to say I want 3 people to come and eat. And now I've kind of built my schedule a little bit in terms of what I expect the gala experience to be like for what I really want to engage in, things I want to know. This, I think, has a lot of opportunity to think really creatively about how this is utilized and leveraged. Some of it comes down to really determining is what you're trying to do, have reporting needs that you're looking for. Are you trying to capture, what kind of information are you trying to capture from a user input standpoint? And I think it's asking some of those questions really determines why you would do this over like customized questions. And I would say that we could probably go back and forth for a while to really figure out what's the best one. But so I see the question in the chat about, can somebody come back and edit this? The short answer is no. So because they're a guest user, they can't like submit the full registration and then come back and make changes. But while they're in here, it is still, if I were to go backwards as an example, you can see it's still saving it in the moment. So if somebody's like, oh, I want to add this, I want to go back and forth before they submit their registration, they can still go back and have those things saved within their browser. So except for this one didn't save. So that was a bad example. I think if I would have progressed forward and then gone back, it would have completed it. Someone does it complete it, does it not get to Salesforce? That is a great question. The short answer to that is it does still get to Salesforce. After the first page, it creates a registration record in a started state. So you can always follow up with that person and say, hey, I see you complete your registration. We'd love for you to still come. They can go ahead and I would say restart the registration process, or depending on their browser, they might be able to actually have their cookies captured so that they can come back and it'll be pre-filled out for them when they come back. So those are great questions. Next here. And then this is where you get to that submit page where you can review everything. So seeing about the additional guests that were registered, what sessions and options did they select? So you can see that it's all spelled out here with what their responses were and the total cost of the event itself. It is at this point when somebody reviews it in which they can go back and make edits. But hitting submit registration with a cost component here is when you would then get kicked out to a payment page. And then that payment page, the way that we have talking about wanting this to work is it would feed back the appropriate information to fit on the registration record so that you are not holding or owning any type of credit card data. And I would say allowing the payment processor to be the PCI compliant solution, not Summit Events or not Salesforce in that sense. You can keep this tool to be purely the event registration and capturing the things that you need. So we'll go ahead and hit submit registration. We get to the final page, and this is where we'll look at the back end. And actually, before we look at the back end, because so many people might be doing this, I didn't want to blast people with emails. But in the sense that like the transactional email, this could be an email that you might get back from somebody or from the event. So the email got sent from the event's email address. It comes back in whatever header image you want to do. Being able to have add to calendar links. So if you do want to add it to your calendar, I'll just click on this. We can see that it automatically opens up my Google account. It gives me the time and date of the event in the time zone that the event is taking place. It gives the address in the right fields, and then it takes the information from the event itself about what the event is, so the person can remind themselves what it is that they registered really early. So click a link, very simple to just add it to your calendar and be ready to go. I don't think I can go back to that email now. That's all right. But all that email had merged in content. And I think that's the key point of it is you can still make those emails personalized, particularly in a transactional sense coming from Salesforce. So you don't have to think about pre-building those in your event solution ahead of time. You can at least get the registration email out there and then consider the reminder emails out of whatever email tool you might be using later. So we are going to leave this and go back here. So this is the front end. I'm going to actually click back. And you'll see that this is where it like starts over now. So because I submitted the registration, it cleared it all out, and I can come back in here. But if we go to the back end, what we'll end up seeing is like this is where Summit Events is being built from scratch. So in here, I think the key points that I want to highlight are on the event record. As we had looked at the architecture earlier, the event is where we start to create everything. This is where we are creating that event name in terms of what's being presented on the first registration page. The template is what starts to be able to build that branding. So while I don't have another one in here, it's what maybe I'll pull it up here a little bit later and show, but you can switch this out. So if you had multiple higher ed has great use cases, mainly because if you look at like the admissions and undergraduate office, their branding is a little bit different than what the graduate school programs are. So being able to have this differentiation between the two becomes really important. Or if you're supporting a joint event with somebody, you can create a template that makes it really seamlessly show that it's for the both of you, not just for the one organization. The other thing just to call out in terms of like being able to structure the event, this is where we can really start to get into filtering and thinking about calendaring. So every time you create an event and within the Summit Events package becomes a calendar that you can either embed on your website or I think what we like to call a feed where you can start to filter things to really create a customized experience. Those are all going to be built on how these audiences are displayed. And you can add whatever audience list to this. Again, standard Salesforce, just go to the pick list values and start adding the values that feel as appropriate. And you can start to make it fit your needs. If I click on this link, this is where we see the calendar of all the events that are in this org. And it's on general public right now, but I just added current students. You can see it makes it more audience specific for the types of events that somebody might want to register for, being able to get a little bit of it as they hover over it and see. This is what the calendar looks like out of the box. I know that has worked with a couple other schools to be able to embed this, but some schools have also then customized it to be more specific to their website branding and style. St. Thomas is actually a great example of it, to where this is not going to look exciting to anybody for the most part, but this is essentially what gets pulled out of Salesforce to be able to now filter on be able to present information to your website team or web developer or whoever is working on your website to be able to create cards or whatever style to be able to present them on a website in a more meaningful way for who you work for. So, and then this starts to be all the things that we can filter on. So there's a lot of like tools in here for outside the developer and for the website staff to really make this important, to not feel like you have to stick to just this calendar. But again, depending on how you're administering your events, every time you do this, the event registration link gets created from the instance, which I'll get to in a minute. So
there was a question about being able to embed the event in Experience Cloud, or the calendar, I guess.
Yeah. I guess I haven't tried to embed the calendar into the Experience Cloud site myself. However, what I have done is I've actually created collections of event registrations in Experience Cloud, and you can create a list that is accessible to whatever users. And then you can actually get like cards and put whatever images you want on them so that when the logged in user clicks on it, if we have it built on the same site path, that logged in user's information could pre-fill based on what we know, at least first name, last name, email.
It also should be noted that this is like a REST API, which means it's publicly available. And St. Thomas uses this to like when Ryan showed you that list of, it's basically JSON data. And if you
can I show the St. Thomas website? I just pull it up.
Of course you can.
Okay.
It's JSON data that you can take in and turn into any front end looking, a good front end developer can change it into any display they want to. So it really, like, this is a good example where our front end developers made them into little templated squares. So if you click on them, that one of those, it'll take you to the St. Thomas. This is using UST events, the beginning of Summit events, but takes you straight to our site in Salesforce and then starts the registration process. You can see it's templated to match the Opus College of Business. So,
and then all of this is feeding from Salesforce as well. So what we saw on the homepage, this is now, you can now filter it in a more meaningful way. So it's not so much of a calendar of dates of events. And I always think of calendars of like, what's the value of a calendar if people are looking for certain types of events? Is it easier to find them on a calendar? Is it easier to find them in a list? It's filterable. I think it's a question of how are people engaging with your organization institution, and what are you trying to create registrable that you want to be able to surface in some way?
You could iframe it on a site too, Claire. I'm not a big fan of iframes, but it's iframeable.
Perfect. All right. So as coming back into this in terms of building it, all of this, again, is configurable. And I just typed into these rich text areas. One of the things I'll just do is like cut it out and save. If we go back to this page, it's going to immediately be gone. So all of this is, when we talk about like real-time updating, like if you find an edit or you want to change the image, you want to add a field, all of it's going to happen like, yes, now there's no more open bar. All of it's going to happen in real time. And I think to me, that's really important, knowing this one, you get immediate satisfaction when you're building these things. And that once you have this structure set up, you can immediately test, review, make sure it's looking exactly the way that you want before you actually would feel like you need other people to test it or post it publicly. So this is what you end up doing for all the pages is you type in here in these rich text fields, and it's going to brand it and let's say more articulate what you're trying to get across. Before I go through the rest of it, the other thing in terms of the base of what you need, so creating this event, the other thing you need is this instance. As you can have multiple on each event, the instance I would say is one of the more simple things to fill out. But we also, I would say this is where we really got into it as we brought it into the commons, is really being able to make it a little more detailed than what it was before. So being able to have an individual title associated to it, breaking out the date and time. But I would say most importantly, thinking about time zone of the the event itself, so that when somebody adds it to their calendar, or in this case where I'm based centrally, and I think, are you guys all Mountain Time or Pacific? Not sure. Either it doesn't really matter, either or. When there's a difference in time zone, the person who's adding it to their calendar is at least getting the right time based on where they're located now. And that wasn't something we had thought of prior to getting into the event, even though in higher education, you are having registrable events in other time zones, particularly around the travel season. So, and here's where you see the QR code is generated. This is where we did this intentionally, knowing that paper is still a reality, particularly in the nonprofit and higher education space. So as you're sending out paper invitations, being able to add a QR code so somebody can scan it versus typing in a link that you're sending them. I always think typing in a link, it can be challenging. But in this case, you're going to be able to really make it simple to add it to whatever mailer you're putting out there and have people register from there. It's a good question here about ticketing tiers and general admissions and sponsorship levels. I wanted to say like not really, but in terms of like how you would do general admissions versus different levels, the way that I would envision doing that today, I'm not saying that this is how you would always do it, is that you could actually create multiple instances. And on each one of these instances, if you have multiple, and I'll actually just do this, you can have overrides to be able to make it more than what it is normally. So in this case, if I have this one, I'm actually just going to clone it. And we are going to do an override fee. And we'll do this one of $75. I think I have to put in an allocation. Fun. And we'll leave that one blank. So this is going to create a separate instance, which means it's creating a separate registrable link that you might send with specific people. But when we go into it, because it's a part of the same event, we should see that the only thing that's changed is the event cost. And this actually absorbed the other fee that's there. So on the event fee, if I go here, we can see that I had 150 and then I had this additional fee. So it's still absorbing that additional fee. I'd have to put that as 0 in the instance, but this is where you could start to have those tiers, and you'd have to be really intentional about who you're sharing those tier lists with. Say if you're this tier, register here. If you're this tier, register here. It would be more ideal in my mind if you could select that up front and the cost dynamically change based on how you identified. I would love to hear more about how you identify those sponsorship tiers or ticket tiers and promote it through one single event, knowing that it might be more of a hassle to have to follow up with somebody to say like, you actually aren't this. We're going to either charge you more, or somebody doing it wrong and now having to deal with refunds. I am just not well versed in how that works. So I'd love to hear more about it.
It might be helpful to give an example. Are you thinking like at a gala, you can buy like a table or something like that? Is there a particular use case you're thinking of?
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking of at typically a gala event where you have different corporate sponsorship levels, and then you might even have individuals that are, buying a single ticket for themselves, or maybe they're buying a table.
Yeah. One of the
definitely
things
on our radar, because at St. Thomas, our alumni uses this, and they have those sorts of events too. So we just have to crack the code, and you should come join a sprint and help us understand it better and make it happen.
I don't know if it's on this list. One of the things that it might not be on the layout, we've talked about doing is, in that sense, if you were to register and there was a registration fee, having it in these appointment types object to where then you could create different levels. So if you were buying a table, you could indicate how many, and then that would dynamically adjust what the cost looks like. So then you're selecting it as an option as part of your registration, in which then there's a lot of questions about after that. Are you filling out the names? But that was one way that we thought we could solve for that. But I agree with that. The more we can get perspective on it, and get that community engagement to be able to inform us of what they envision it to look like, I'd say the more meaningful it's going to be to more users of the application out there to really be able to solve, I think, some of those challenges that I feel like that's a common question we get. And it makes me think, are other event solutions doing this well, that there's a model that works or there's not? So good questions. Where do I want to go from here? Sorry. So we just looked at the instances, right? And that they're relatively simple in terms of what you need to put together. The QR code is there. You should be able to see when the registration is open based on how you've set up the event. But if we look at the other things that are on here, this is where we can start to customize what the labels are. We got a lot of good feedback from the community about we don't call this. We don't like, I would say gender was actually one that was a hot topic. I think we had it called something else and they're like, but I don't call it that either. Knowing that particularly for an overnight event, this is something that someone in higher ed might ask. If you want to relabel that to be more appropriate to what you want it to be, it's something that you can put out there. Or you can see I have preferred name relabeled here. all of the things that we do have labels to be able to try and build it. So being able to ask the custom questions you want, being able to label any of the guest registration headers and title, or not just guest registration, any of the page titles, all become customized to what you can put in there. So I know we only got about like 10 minutes left. I think what I do want to show is on the event registration record, what happens. So in the complex record that we had created, we'll end up seeing that there's a lot of related lists associated here. So while the event registration records captures everything that we have on here, a couple of things were also at work. This is, I think, the first one I created earlier today, created this event registration. But if I actually go and find, I register again. Let's go to, I need to go to all. And I'm going to find Ryan Blake in here again. This one right here. Whoever put party animal, I love it. I clicked on the wrong one. Here we go. Should be this one. So on this event registration, what we should see is that it didn't create a new contact. So I have contact and lead matching on. This registration got created. I can actually go to this contact record in Salesforce. I should be able to see that there's 2 event registrations. It just took me to the other event registrations. Hold on. Should be able to go here and see there's 2 event registrations associated to this. And so it matched based on my name and email address using standard Salesforce duplicate matching rules. So you can have them set up. You can have it be customized per event. And really whatever criteria you want to use to do matching, you just need to set it up on the back end. And then on the event itself, you actually can choose, go to contact and lead matching, what duplicate rule you want to use. So if your events are asking things that you don't necessarily ask otherwise, and you want to refine and be more detailed, you can have a duplicate rule just for your events versus trying to leverage something else that might create more chaos than you want. You can also,
I was going to point out that the usually all duplicate rules fire in order, but our particular trigger will go through and choose the one that you've selected there. So you do get some fine tuning that you can do there. Same with leads.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also see Mike's comment about the labels and making it more universally used cases for other languages and not having it to be English specifically, or even American English at that. I'll throw out there. So, and then the other thing on contact matching, you can just skip it. So in the case that it doesn't match and you don't want it to create one in the event that you might have duplicates, you can just skip it entirely, and then it won't create a contact. And then you can
and you
match
don't have
it
to use this at all. You can shut it all the way off. So it just is a orphaned registration record that maybe you hook up to a contact later.
So back into this one. I should also note, for those of you who did go through it and register, this is a dev org and it will be deleted in like 5 days automatically. So just as FYI. The other things on this event registration, aside from duplicate and capturing all the details and information, this is one of the new things that we, not new things we did to catch up summit events to where the old UST events was creating these itineraries so that when somebody is registering for an event and you want to send them what it looks like via email, you can follow up with them, tell them what they potentially requested, or even tell them what they did, and auto confirm what their schedule might look like. So the related list that we have here is already has times associated to it. So in an email, I would say, okay, I need to be there by 5:15, and I have my entire plan of this gala set up for me to know where to be when things are starting, and how I can really engage throughout it. Really important when you think about visiting campuses, being able to set out what tour times, check-in, all of that. And with any of these, you don't have to present them all. So you can always create an appointment type that's hidden from the user. So like check-in as an example, you don't need to present to somebody that they have to check in. Like you just need to tell them when to check in. So you could have a check-in appointment that's not shown, but automatically added to their itinerary after the fact, and then be able to present that in an email format. The last thing that I'll just call out here is the fees got, or the last two things, the fees got captured in the two records based on the different allocations that can be created. So if there was like a fee allocation that you needed to have go towards credit card processing, I'm making stuff up right now, versus an allocation that might be specific towards a certain fund that you're managing, you can separate those evenly so that you know from the accounting side of it what dollars should be going where. And from the NPSP side of it, you could very easily create some declarative automation to match those fees to any type of general accounting unit you might be leveraging to support just that data model collectively. Now, the last thing I'll say is when I created this registration, I had entered my wife's name as well as I don't know yet. And these hosted registrations then got created. So if I actually click on Christine here, we'll see that there's a link to the initial registration so that we know that there's some type of relationship there. And again, in these use cases, thinking about how we can automate as much as possible. While it's not built in the package, thinking about just EDA and NPSP, being able to capture this, if we know where they answered what their relationship was together, being able to create a relationship record, I think it becomes really powerful to automate those processes, particularly if you're creating contacts on both ends of it. So is there anything anybody else wants to see before I go back to the PowerPoint?
Yeah, Ryan, I was wondering, you said they get connected. How is that done?
How connected in which way? Sorry.
Like the hold spot person, like this person to
So this one is actually Christine, but the other one to that hold spot, I think this is where, again, I created this based on a conversation I had yesterday. But being able to run a report to say who has an event registration that has no registrant contact information, to then see who is the connected person, to then be able to do follow up. And that's kind of what they articulated to me is, people want to be able to hold a spot, buy a ticket, buy a table of 10, but not sure who's all going to be there. And there's either a process that they already have built in to where they're doing follow-up outreach about who those names are. Or it's, yeah. So
but
that's what
you might be talking about how they got connected. And the way they did was when that registration went through, Ryan entered that person as a guest. And at that point, that connection happened. So,
okay.
But they're both registrations, which we thought was great because you might want to check both of them into the event and say, this person came, and they'd have their own independent record.
You mentioned earlier in the deck that the appointments are separate from the instance. Could you kind of go into what you mean by that?
Yeah.
If I understood it correctly.
Yep. So at the event level is where all the appointment types gets created. And these are the different sessions or options that you can select from it. If I go into one of these, we have some ability to create these restrictions. And one of them is restrict to a specific instance title. So if we wanted to make this available to just a certain instance collectively within it, we could restrict it as just one. So which one is this? Tour of the Garden.
You have two titles.
I know. I'm looking at the number here. I'm going to go to the 4. If we save this, what we should experience is when we go to 5, we just register it. We'll just do this super quick.
Not sure this will work, but go ahead. Because it really is about the title, and your titles are the same.
Oh, is it? Okay. Just skip that. Oh, if it's about the titles and the titles were the same, then that would make sense.
It could be, yeah.
Well, the idea is that it wouldn't appear because you restricted it to a specific instance to be able to surface up.
I feel like that was the weird St. Thomas thing that each threw, that they had certain titles.
Yeah.
So it would kind of make sense the way you did it in my mind, but maybe we'll upgrade that.
We'll put it down as a bugger enhancement and be good to go. But the same thing, I would say this is also being able to restrict certain days of the week. So if you're offering a reoccurring event, but certain days of the week, certain things aren't available because the office is closed, the resource isn't available, whatever the case is, you can restrict it to just days of the week and times so that it is instance specific. and not having to go and restrict each, not having to create multiple appointments and restrict them to multiple instances. You could just do it based on time or days of the week and start to narrow in on the single appointment type record. But every instance should offer the same appointment types unless you create those restrictions.
So questions out there. How long did this take you to make today? I know that you're a pro at this, but
yeah, I probably put this all together. I'm going to say in 2 hours, but I'm going to say an hour of it was actually like finding these images, copying them and slicing them down to the size that you needed. But again, to me, it was, this is an example, and it probably actually took me a while to think of a use case, put in the text, try and make it somewhat meaningful. But if you already know your event and you know what type of experience you're building, I'd say some of those things can come rather quickly once you really understand the tool. Just like any tool, as you're learning it, it's always trying to figure out, well, where do I put this? Where does this make sense? How do I make sure that this piece functions? But I think I don't want to speak for the people at St. Thomas, but like, how long does it take them to spin up a new event?
Well, first of all, there's the beautiful clone button, which will let you clone an old event you had made, which should,
fair enough.
Once you've made it once, you've sped it up. But I don't know exactly how long they hem and haw over their events. They probably do a little bit at a time and kind of refine it. So.
Yeah. On that note of cloning, it doesn't do like a super clone. So it doesn't clone other related records. That's something we've talked about. One of the things that I've encouraged is leveraging Salesforce Labs super clone tool. So that's something that you can install. It's free. I don't know if people have used it before, but it's something that I know I had gotten to work once so that I could actually identify what I want to be cloned. Because if I cloned this event, I really only want to clone the questions, the appointment types, and maybe the email. Like, I don't want the registrations because it's not relevant. The instances are going to be net new anyways. So I really want to make it as seamless as possible, but also identify what it is. And I think that's where we have come to, sometimes we get stuck on it of what makes sense to me right now isn't going to make sense to the general community. And it's that kind of feedback that's always helpful. But if there's other free tools to help make that happen, I would say we encourage that as part of the conversation to consider to really make it fruitful for you. Great questions.
Any other lingering questions? They were, really good questions.
There's a couple other slides we have too, just to talk through, but I'd rather answer questions.
The slides are available to you, so you can look through them at your leisure. There's some links further on about how to follow us and where the communities are for us, that some of you asked how you could get involved.
Well, why don't we just run through these quick and then we'll get to it. And I think the features and the value add, like this slide is really talking about like what it is you're getting out of it. And I do think that it's the customizable piece of it, and that everything should be customizable, at least that we try to make it that way. Some of the automation functionality, you can't, but you can actually turn some of those things off now, like creating contacts, creating leads and appointments. If you don't want those triggers to run, you have the ability to control those. And then you can also leverage all the Salesforce declarative automation with things like Flow to make the things that you want to happen, as well as build on top of it. So if you want to track speakers or anything like that, you can always loop those in to make it make sense for how you want to track your data. So this is the team. I just want to give kudos to the people who are on this slide. Mike is with us today, but Donna and Jim as well, who have really kind of led the charge to make all this happen and really make for what we're offering free, what I think is a really robust tool. Knowing that schools are using this in their day-to-day as part of their revenue stream, I think says volumes. And I think it's exciting to continue working on it to see, especially where it's coming and going.
And we're open to new team members. We have lots of roles to fill, and we meet monthly. That's your main commitment, but then beyond that, there's different roles you can take on.
and then here's the links that was talking about. So I think we shared the link to the presentation, and I'll say check these out, and then where you can follow us and learn more, and then how to install it. And there's some information about the Salesforce.org Commons program. I think the last slide shows Corey O'Brien, who is the contact for that. So I have some questions that I want to ask that I think might be important for this group. One of them is about coming back to payments. And if I'm going to stop sharing. That's all right.
Wait. Let's give Ryan and Thad a round of applause first. Thank you so much for the presentation. And thank you for spending your time and creating this all together. I know we all really appreciate it. So a round of applause. And then I'll let you
kind of the guinea pig for the new branding we just received. So you're the first to see it.
So I'm wondering that if you want to talk about, we showed that payments could happen. We've talked about it could be connected. I wonder if you want to try and sum up the idea behind how to incorporate payments as part of this solution.
Yeah. What we really need is payment companies to step up and make us the nice little page that would work with us. But you all probably have different, payments comes up especially with galas and nonprofits and donations and things like that. It's kind of the main deal. You need that money coming in. For undergrad visits, we don't charge people to come visit us. We just want them to come pay us a bunch of money to attend our school. But that being said, our alumni people really want it too. And I have a recipe for TouchNet T-Link partners that works, but it has never really been used. We use also this T-Link UPay site. But basically you have fees that can get attached to the events. I envision adding fees to appointments at some point, and each of those fees can have a fee allocation. And the idea behind that is that those would be budget lines kind of behind the scenes. The fee that the person sees wouldn't include those, but it's a way of reconciling your books afterwards. And the reason we have two fees for an event and an instance is because our alumni team is half of that fee we need to pay for the actual event, and the other half is a donation, but we don't necessarily want that to be up front and center as much, but we just want the person to pay this much. So we did pay attention to that. But really what happens is we have to get these kind of recipes out there so that you the way to hook I'm babbling now, but the way you hook to another, it's kind of similar to the way we have templates. You add your template to the pick list. Once you've made your template, which is a Visualforce page, which I need to make a good tutorial about, you add to a pick list your payment gateway. So you could have multiple if you really wanted to, and that will designate what you jump out to from Summit events. Now, Summit events keeps track of itself because it's a guest user. And if you know anything about Salesforce, the guest user really only has insert access, which is what we had to figure out. But what we do is we encrypt this cookie with Salesforce AES 256 military grade, I guess, encryption, and it gets kept in the client browser. So if you jump to another page and you have the key, which is available to payment gateways, you can decrypt that cookie and see the registration. So that gives you the ability to add whatever payment gateway you want.
Complicated.
Yeah, maybe that's right.
I'm getting a little lost. So maybe we could just go, maybe I can say what I think you're saying. And
yeah,
then
please do. I'm notorious for that. So sorry about that.
I think what we're talking about is right now, you can go to the event, you can sign up, and we know that, I signed up, it's $100, right? And then I'm getting some kind of email that has a link to PayPal that is Claire, pay your $100, right? Yeah. So what we're talking about right now is how we can embed that pay link into that event page. Is that what we're talking about?
I would almost say it's really about when you get to that submit page, you can then pay as part of the registration, and that's a requirement to actually completely register. So, I think that if I were to summarize some of what you're saying, some additional effort, like once you install it, some additional efforts needed to be able to create that connection from Salesforce and Summit events to the payment gateway to then be able to pull that data back. And I think
you need a developer is what you need.
Yeah.
And so my hope is that when people get developers, they'll share those recipes, and so that it won't be a big lift for everyone.
Right.
But you're right. A PayPal link would work. You could put that in the email link and register that way, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
It'd just be reconciling that after the fact, which would be the difficult part.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
I think, yeah.
I would say it's one of the areas we would love to get more support. So if you are a developer or you know somebody who's looking to volunteer their time or has experience with connecting payment gateways, I know we said this at the front end, but like I would love to see us be able to have a clear path to be able to like connect with something like Stripe, as that seems to be commonly leveraged and used. So that any nonprofit could come in there, at least see what the base requirements are, make some adjustments, maybe with some help to actually be able to complete that collectively. So
someone wants to see a report. You got one handy? I know we packaged a certain amount of them, but
let me see if I can find one before I share my screen. So it's not just me clicking around.
Is it true that you are kind of beholden to the payment processor or payment gateway, because they're going to have their own, like every different processor is going to have their own way of writing back to Salesforce. So it's, and they all have their different keys and all this, right? So I see. Yeah.
That's why we couldn't build it straight in there, because we don't know who your payment processor is. We don't know how they interact. And we have to be loose that way. But we did make this mechanism to make it work if someone's willing to go the extra mile and make it work.
Right. All right. I did find some reports out here. This is one of the ones that's out here that's just standard Salesforce, or that's standard to the package. So it's in here. This is looking at registrations over the next 30 days, but all of this is just native Salesforce. So you can create whatever type of report that you want to. This one just happens to be looking only at the event registrations. To be able to pair this up to look at an event collectively, right? You should be able to just create any report, but these ones come with the package itself. Based on what we've experienced, we wanted to get at least some starter packages out there. I haven't looked at all of these, so I don't know if this is going to surface. And it does, perfect. But we want to get things started, especially for those who are less familiar with reporting. You at least could start from these and then manipulate or save as to create something that's going to be specific to you and what your needs are. But this would be a standard Salesforce report. We haven't come up with any dashboards because I think dashboards end up being very specific to the organization. And we want to be mindful of how much we're throwing into a package, because we do not want it to be this big, robust thing that becomes unmanageable. We want, not just for the community, but even for the users downloading it, we want to keep it relatively tight and slim enough so that it doesn't become overbearing. You have to learn all of these objects. You want to be able to know what you can do right away. So
that's another aspect of the community in the fact that there are a lot of Salesforce skills that come into play, admin skills. And oftentimes we'll get down a rabbit hole of helping someone with admin skills, which anybody in the community could do, which would be nice. I mean, especially if you're using Summit events.
Yeah.
We have 2 more minutes left. So anyone has a last question, or Ryan maybe has a question for us?
I don't have any more questions off the top of my head, at least. But one of the things I usually like to say is, like, from install, I think actually the installation video and getting it set up is a total of 7 minutes long. So like walking through it, setting it up is really simple. So if it's something you want to test and try in a sandbox, I would encourage that. Or even, again, you could use a Trailhead org. Any Trailhead org you have, go ahead and install it. And being able to get your first event up, I tend to say, like, you can get all that done within 30 minutes. And that's just a very simple event, being able to create the records, add in some text, and get it up. I think there's something to say about that in terms of how it can be simple. It's as you get to be more complex is where the questions usually start to come in.
And that's where you might find the bugs to report to us, which would be good.
Exactly. Yes.
I think you do have a video out there where you do a whole event thing in like 15 minutes or something.
I think it's 15 minutes, but I'm also like over verbose and talking and saying things. So it could have been quick. Anyways, it's not the point.
Well, I'm gonna.
If people do have, yeah.
Lastly, I just want to thank you again, Ryan and Thad, for joining us and sharing. I know we went a little bit over time and we don't have any more time for questions, but we will be posting the recording. We'll also be posting all the helpful links. Again, they are looking for lovely volunteers to help out, whether it be testing or developers. Even if you don't have developer skills, there's always ways that you can help out. So please do reach out. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, if people do have questions or want to connect, don't hesitate to send us email or find us on LinkedIn.
Or the Trailblazer community too.
Yeah. Yep.